Thank you for showing up today. I could not be more excited about the panel that we have going on building inclusive boards. Thank you also to our panelists for being here. It's all good to see your faces again. Before we get started, I kind of wanted to start with a little story about my own experience with my first board meeting. So when I first joined a board, I was so nervous that I accidentally called the board president mom. Yep, I'm not even kidding. I was mortified. Luckily, she had a great sense of humor. And I suppose it would have been a little more embarrassing if I had a male board president and said daddy or something. But you know, it could have been worse. We all had a good laugh. And it was always this reminder for me that I think boards can feel like this very esoteric, serious, amorphous thing. But they are just another group of weird humans getting things done. And bringing that humanity and kind of lifting the veil off of boards is what we're going to be focused on today. So we're going to be delving into the diverse world of boards, how to build them, why they're so critical to organization success, and how to ensure that they're inclusive. To help us do that, I've got three incredible panelists who are going to bring a range of experiences to the conversation. First, please welcome Leigh Honeywell. So Leigh is the CEO and co-founder of Tall Poppy, a company that helps organizations protect their employees from online harassment. Leigh is an activist, a technologist, and a recognized figure in the world of cybersecurity. Her background includes stints at Slack, the ACLU, and Microsoft. Next, we have Igeme. Igeme is the founder and chief visionary officer for Innovare, Social Innovation Partners. They're a community-based, community-focused company that uses data and technology in the face of education. Igeme uses his passion for education and social equity to create meaningful and impactful change. And lastly, we have Jason. Jason is the Vice President of Policy and Public Affairs for the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce. He is a pioneering force in LGBT plus rights with representations in both politics and business. And so we've got a number of questions for the panelists today, each that will hopefully provide an opportunity to explore a different facet of board diversity and effectiveness. I'm not going to be tackling every single question that we have on the list. I doubt that we'll have all the time, but I have some extras just in case. But what I promise you is by the time that we're done, you're going to leave with a more comprehensive understanding of what an inclusive and effective board is and what it would take to build one. So let's kick off with our first question. And I'm going to throw this right at Jason, right? Peter Drucker once said, management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things. With that in mind, Jason, I'm curious, could you describe a type of board you've been a part of and how it was supposed to lead or manage you or your organization?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Thomas. And great to be with AJ and Leigh. And hello, everyone. You know, I've been honored to be a part of multiple boards throughout my professional career, both civic, philanthropic, community building. You know, and a couple include, you know, I'm on the board that governs our baseball stadium in Milwaukee. I'm on our Convention and Visitor Bureau, some political boards. But all of them, when I really think about, to your point around how's it supposed to lead or manage, I think it's really important to just recognize that the board's role is really to provide guidance and oversight to the leadership and not to necessarily do the day-to-day of the work. So the board's real responsibility is really around helping the CEO, that senior leadership team, understand what's going on, bring a broad ideas and perspectives to the table, but not to micromanage the work. The board guides the senior leader, and the senior leader manages the organization day to day. It is that board that is providing that input. And I've seen it work, you know, where boards tend to fail is when they do get into that idea of trying to manage everything and be in the weeds on what's going on. That board is that strategic advice. And I kind of joke, sometimes people will say, well, are you a working board or not? And I think all boards are working boards in some way or another. You're either working and helping make connections, build relationships, help provide insight, But to make a really effective board is about helping guide that strategic vision of the organization. And that's what I've seen work really well. And with that, then you really need to have that diversity of thought around the table to make sure that you're asking the right questions.
Awesome. I really love the point of Jason, you calling out what a board is not in terms of micromanaging and running the company. We'll come back to this a little bit later, but I'd love to get the thoughts of the whole panel on how exactly you make sure that happens, because I think finding that sweet spot of making sure the board isn't uninvolved, but isn't overly involved, is something I think I'm still trying to figure out the balance of. But before we kind of get into that depth, still on the topic of what it means to actually build a component of these boards, there's a quote from Verna Myers that I love, and there are multiple versions of this that have flown around over the last couple of years, but this is still remains one of my favorite, probably during Pride Month in particular. Diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. Leigh, I'm curious, what does an inclusive board mean to you in this context? And why is that concept personally important? And how have you gone about making that real in the boards that you've worked with and on?
Yeah, and I wanted to do a little bit of a zoom out before going into the inclusive boards aspect. My experience with boards includes both nonprofit boards, both like director and sort of advisor, and then within the startup ecosystem, both being on the board of my own company and advising a number of other companies, as well as like assembling a board of advisors for my company. So when I think about all of those different types of boards, the question of inclusivity, who to invite to dance, I think it's really important to think about being intentional in the curation and design of this ecosystem that you're building in your board. And thinking about who the stakeholders within the organization are is going to be really important for that sort of initial level set. You may have explicit obligations for who is going to be on, say, a board of directors of a for-profit company that's raised investor capital. It may be a condition of your investors that they have a place on that board. And then you have to sort of balance the equities of the original founders, outside investors. At what point do you start to think about bringing in an outside or new, like an expert board member to that board of directors? We've also seen some really interesting trends in terms of that inclusivity piece of including employee interest on boards of directors. And I know a couple of startups where there is actually an employee member of the board of directors. I think that's a really, really powerful way of aligning the interests of the people who work at the organization with the strategic direction of the company. So I think there's a lot of innovation happening right now. We're also seeing some regulatory forces at play, depending on the jurisdiction. The two that are very top of mind for me are, one, there's a push towards including cybersecurity expertise. And unfortunately, you may have noticed the cybersecurity industry, not super diverse. So you got to like the win some, you lose some in terms of the inclusion piece, because you have to include the cybersecurity expertise, but there just aren't that many cybersecurity people who are not extremely normative. And then the other one is starting to have gender quotas in some places. It's pretty depressing when you look at the numbers in terms of women's inclusion on boards. But we do also know from the research that that inclusion does actually have a powerful positive effect, both on the financial results of these organizations and on their governance. So it's a bit of a side approach to that sort of inclusion question, but I think the real fundamental thing is like being really intentional and deliberate in how you structure that board, both to accommodate regulatory or other obligations, but also to make sure that you're capturing that full set of stakeholders.
Got it. And Leigh, I love the call out you made on these different types of boards, right? And I'd love to zero in for a moment on the startup board, the board of directors versus board of advisors or advisory committee. I'm curious first from you, Leigh, and then I'd love to hear for anybody else. How do you think about who goes on which board and when? And I know there's no answer, so maybe how have you thought about who went on which board and when?
Yeah, so I think the fundamental thing with who goes on which board is that the commitment to being an actual capital D director of an organization, whether it's a for-profit or a nonprofit, is much more significant in terms of the legal liabilities, in terms of the time commitment, just in terms of the depth of involvement. Fundamentally, if you are on the board of directors of an organization, you are fiduciary to that organization. You have financial and legal obligations to that organization. So it's a pretty big ask. Generally, it is like a compensated position when it's an independent board member, or it's in the purview of someone's role as an investor. But it is a big commitment to be part of that formal board of directors. Much lighter touch, the board of advisors. We have, I think, 7 people on our board of advisors, ranging from industry experts, malware experts. We do cybersecurity, so very deep, like technical expertise, as well as folks who are focused on the sort of sociology of the problems that we work to address. One mistake that I made in structuring that board, that it took me a long time to figure out, like, oh, actually, this is like expertise that I need on that sort of advisory cohort, is I didn't really focus enough on the sort of go-to-market and business strategy aspect of it. I really focused on subject matter experts. I'm a subject matter expert too. I don't have an MBA. Like, I'm learning all this business stuff from scratch. It probably would have been good to have someone earlier on who had that deep business expertise. So really, again, that's that question of intentionality, thinking through what are the skill sets within your organization. Are there gaps within either the board of directors or the employee base that you could potentially fill with someone in an advisory capacity? The other really interesting thing that I've seen with a lot of startups is the idea of a customer advisory board. And this is like in a big enterprise sales kind of context. This is honestly kind of a way to like get those early customers. You're like, hey, I'm building a customer advisory board. Like, would love to have you as an influencer in my ecosystem. And you're having these conversations about the sort of product. And the goal is really to sell to this company, but you can bring them into this sort of ecosystem of a customer advisory board. And I've seen a lot of like B2B SaaS companies use that really, really effectively. So it's a couple different flavors of boards that I've seen on the for-profit side. On the nonprofit side, I am involved in a local housing affordability nonprofit. I'm on the board of that. And I've done a ton of advisory work historically, but you haven't been on an actual like capital B board in a while. And again, there's that same separation of like you're fiduciary or you're not. And making sure that you have really good guardrails and clear communication of what the expectations are. One thing that I think a lot of organizations struggle with is like succession planning is always hard, but specifically that sort of advisor succession, people have different seasons in their lives and their careers, and making it okay to say like, hey, it's been great being on this email list, contributing to this nonprofit. I got to go do other stuff for a little bit, so I'm going to step down. I've been on a couple of boards over the years that actually did a really good job of making that a really explicit process, that this isn't a forever commitment. And I think that's part of how you build the bench, is by having explicit intentional turnover in a positive way. So I've monopolized the conversation enough. So I'm super curious because I know there's a good mix of nonprofit and for-profit. Yeah.
No. Thank you so much for that, Leigh. And I certainly know that that has certainly been true of all the boards I've been a part of. There were very explicit time limits and commitments. And I think those are, in my startup world in particular, I found that any more than 24 months felt like too long. Just the speed of iteration at the startup meant that like what we needed was drastically different. And there are a few people who still make sense going on, but kind of just setting the expectation that it's probably going to look like a whole different slew of folks always felt right. AJ, I'd love to kind of get a bit of your input in, and thank you already for your answers in the chat. Love that. One of the things that I think has been, I've certainly been reading increasingly in the media, is kind of bit of like pushback against diversity efforts, which is interesting in the context of what we're talking about. And a sentiment that boils down to some version of forcing diversity at the top actually just creates more resentment and division rather than unity, right? And that thinking about diversity is really not the purview of a board, certainly a for business board. I'm curious what your reactions are to that. One, are you seeing that? and whether or not you are, what would your reactions to that be?
Yeah, insight and question at the same time. I'm actually posting an article that just came out today about the lack of diversity on boards, right? And that there's still a lack of progress, especially for communities that are growing, such as mine, the Latinx community in the US and really in other places as well. But especially in the US, it's just not matching the trends of other success metrics that I think our community needs to be more a la par with others. But we still see a great, disproportional inequities, right, in terms of board membership. And so I do believe, and as a person of color in the US, and you probably can relate to this, and those of us who are on the call who can understand this, there definitely has been, and the article talks about, sort of a pendulum swing backwards, right, from the George Floyd and the sort of Black Lives Matter and all those sort of conversations, top of mind equity initiatives that all these corporate organizations had, to now sort of the backlash of that, right? And so as you've heard articles almost blaming the diverse boards for decisions that were made, right, and that were negative for the business. When we're like, wait a minute, the white guys has been running this thing for like 50 years. How come you have the 3 Black people now, and now they're responsible for this? No, so I think that sort of shows the racism, right, in the white hegemonic sort of system that we live in, because boards are basically just a microcosm of the racism that is prevalent in the overall society. So I think right now in the U.S., obviously, across the world, we've seen sort of a move towards a more neoconservative movement, right, more conservative, and in some cases hateful policies, right, especially for our community. And I think what I definitely have seen is efforts to counteract the progress that we have made as LGBT people, as people with multiple identities, to get ourselves in the room, literally, and to expand the table, right, to include more of us. So I think that backlash is definitely something that I've seen. But on a more optimistic note, I think that we really can do a lot about it, right? Like, I mean, look at Jason. I mean, his work and really differentiating what the board is and not supposed to be doing. I think that's super important for us, because it sort of maintains our agency as leaders of color, as women leaders, right, to understand who we need to have and in what capacity, like Leigh mentioned, whether as advisor or as a director. And in my case, I'm actually very lucky that my entire board is either a woman, a person of color, or LGBT, so I have made that intentional, and that is by seeking investors who also are those types of people, so on my advisory board, I also have 10% of LGBT people. My C-suite is 33% LGBT. So I think that having an intentionality around what your company is going to attract the right type of investor, right? And then if you're intentional about the investors, then obviously some of those people are going to be your board members. And so you'll have that representation naturally. And it sort of cascades from there, right? Then I think that being intentional, number one, about your company, remember, and I encourage those of us who are on the call who are entrepreneurs like us, think about who you're hiring. If you see that you are in a room full of white people, that is problematic. If you see that you have most of your engineers are men, raise an issue about that. I look at my website and I don't see enough Black faces. I don't see enough Asian faces. And then I ask my HR people to go after those people intentionally. And so I think that really calling it out, naming it out in your organization, because it's really, really hard to do when you already build the organization. It's super large. So I think doing it from day one and being intentional, it's going to create referrals from those same people. They're going to give you access to those networks, etc. And that really helps. So in a nutshell, I think that, I definitely have seen sort of a pendulum swing to, stopping the progress that I think boards have made. But it's also true that I think despite the progress, I think the society sort of mirrors, or the boards mirror, what the society is going through at the time, and I think right now in the US, as we have a lot of, it's a very divisive space right now. And I think the boards are representative of that. But on the positive side, I think that us as LGBT people, we can really lead in that conversation by being bridge builders, right? And helping our investors, our staff, and ourselves sort of connect in a way that's intentional, that can mitigate this sort of backlash that they were experiencing.
Got it. Got it. I absolutely, so much richness there, AJ. First, thank you. And you referenced something Jason said earlier. As you were talking, AJ, this idea of the importance of representation on boards and how proactive you've been, thank you for that again in making that happen, leads me to another question that's kind of the age-old question. I'm embarrassed to ask it, but if I'm honest, I think I still think about this today. How do you balance the importance of representation with the idea of being seen as the token? With the challenge of, I don't want to walk in the room and feel like, well, people think I'm just on this board because the board had to fill a quota, right? And this is not a new question. I think this goes up to any time we try to do to make any progress. But I'm curious, Jason, particularly because of your work with the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce, where you're dealing with business leaders who I think are choosing to put their identity forthright. Have you run into this challenge, either as a board member or in leading like other leaders? And what is kind of your advice for someone who's listening to this, grappling with wanting to make a change and push forward, but not feel limited by one facet of their identity?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think it is one that, I've experienced and I've seen, and I think is one that we all still struggle with today, because you want to build diverse boards, but you don't want to, as you said, Thomas, feel like you were, someone's feeling like they're the token person there because of that diversity and that identity that they're bringing to the table. And I think it really starts with one, making sure there's an intentional plan built around it. That going out and just saying, hey, our board's not diverse, we need to find a new board member who fits category X, and just going with that, but building a real intentional through a nominating committee, through processes that are in place, to not just bring on people to bring on people, but to bring on the right people with that right skill set and value as well, while trying to diversify the organization in it. I think that's something that is really imperative, is the intentionality that is built behind it, and that it takes time. I've watched it happen in boards that I've been on where, we may not be at the right matrix that we want when it comes to representation, but we spend the time to say, how do we really get there? Who are the right networks? How do we engage? And then not only how do we engage, but how do we engage with the right communities to find the right people? Because so often what happens then, at least I have seen in my experience, everyone goes after the same board members. They go after the same few people who are on every other board all the time, because that's the ones who they know have the experience, or they know, has done it before. But it's, how do you really be intentional about the communities that you're engaging with to find those individuals who can serve in that board role, who you may not know. And I think part of that is really how organizations, businesses, nonprofits, whatever it may be, really works to engage their customers, their clients, to really tap into networks. Because otherwise, what happens is those nominating committees find the folks that they know already, and that they stick to the same few folks, and we never actually expand the pool of individuals who are really capable of doing this. And then you end up getting, as Leigh talked about earlier around, capacity and ability to serve, you get folks who are overwhelmed, who are on 10 different things and can't actually do the fiduciary responsibilities that they need as board members. So it's really intentional on all of us to go and find new folks who can fit the skills that we need and train them. People are, not everyone is going to be ready right away to serve on a board, but how do you build up those board skills? How do you get them on? It may be someone's first board experience. How do you, as management, lead and engage and make sure that they're brought up to speed and included that way?
Yeah, I love the get up to speed, and there were some questions around how to do that. We'll hopefully in the time for Q&A get into that more. But I think this idea that being on the board is actually a skill versus just an award. I think, if I'm very honest, like when I was first coming up, it just kind of felt like a like an honorary degree for having been a big deal in business. And it's only as I kind of started my startup, et cetera, and really understanding like there's a whole skill set aligned with it. And there's actually a lot of great resources increasingly out there to get up to speed. So just a call out for organizations like the Athena Alliance for women interested in board practice. AJ, you called out the role of just getting involved as a mentor with different accelerator groups. But there is stuff out there that is, I think, increasingly helping equip people, as you said, Jason, to be able to show up on day one, ready for a role that really is unique. But one of the we've talked quite a bit about representational diversity, but earlier, Leigh, you started to allude to skill diversity and how to think through this. And you kind of laid out why that was important and how to think it through. But I'm curious, if you had to build your dream team board from scratch, both board of directors and board of advisors, and let's get real, let's be it for like Tall Poppy, if you could, or pick another company if there's too much, if there's anything in there that we can't share with us. But I'd love to just know kind of a play-by-play so we can get into the head of a founder doing this. What are the steps you take in order to build the dream team?
Oh man, yeah. I think the starting point with like a for-profit startup board, you're inevitably going to have, 1, 2, or 3 co-founders as the initial board members. And as you go through the process of growing as an organization, it may not make sense to have all of the founders be on the board at some point. That those folks may end up getting replaced with investors and eventually an outside board member. But really the fundamentals are going to come down to governance, finance, and strategic direction. So governance is the standard, like we got to make sure that the taxes are getting filed and that like we're updating our address with the Secretary of State and that sort of like workaday aspects of the board. So I say governance, finance, and strategic direction. On the finance side, it's going to be regular reporting. It's going to be making sure that budgets are in place, that sort of financial oversight. And especially when you look at tech companies, lots of us don't come into this knowing how to do that stuff. So making sure that there's a structure in place for those, technical founders that need the scaffolding of business experience to have access to that. I think that's something that I've seen is challenging for a number of different early stage technical startups. And then in terms of the strategic direction, this is where like, what is the product vision? What is the go-to-market? That sort of big picture vision of the organization. You need to have all of that at a high level. Some of this is going to come from an experienced director who's joining as an investor. If you're a bootstrap startup, you're going to want to bring an outsider on eventually yourselves. But fundamentally, making sure that you don't have those core gaps in the basic, business 101 stuff, I think is a really good place to start. If your founding team is both technical and business side folks, that's, you've got an MBA on your founding team, like they're going to have that background. But I've definitely seen a lot of tech companies where nobody on the founding team has that business background, and the board can be a little bit adrift for the first little bit until they get that expertise. In terms of the advisory board, you've got the whole gamut of what is the sort of subject matter of the organization, making sure that you have advisory expertise in that subject matter. It's actually especially important when one of the founders is themselves a subject matter expert. I'm really grateful to have that sort of in-house expertise within my set of advisors, so that when I'm like really sure about a technical solution to something, I have a sanity check of like, hey, like, based on my experience, this is how I would approach this technical problem. Does anybody else think differently? What am I missing here? Do I have blind spots? And then, rounding out the sort of additional business expertise, hiring, building that customer network. These are all aspects that you may want to bring on as part of your advisory board.
Awesome. Thank you. That was really thorough. And I'm thinking about how much I would have benefited from some of this as you're like working through the pieces. If my like eyes glazed over a little bit, I was actually thinking through one of the boards.
I saw that 1,000-yard stare.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I can definitely just crystallize as like, oh shoot, we're definitely missing the piece around like governance, and like we need to get that ticked and tight. So thank you for that. Certainly a gift to me. I hope it's helpful for other folks who are on there. One of the a quote I love from Gandhi was like, our ability to reach unity and diversity will be the beauty and the test of our civilization. And what I love about that is it both encapsulates the idea that it is absolutely worthwhile to go after. It's beautiful, but it is hard. There's a reason that we don't like just naturally fall into our most diverse and inclusive orientation, like kind of as we go. I'm curious, I'll start with you, AJ, on this one, because you talked about kind of, you actually implored us, quite frankly, around the things that we needed to get going and do within our spheres of control to drive this. And one question that comes to mind is, I'm like, I'm already exhausted by my day job. I can barely keep up to speed with like doing what I'm doing. Where's all the energy for like not just getting a board in place or leading on a board, but making sure it's diverse supposed to come from? I'm just really curious how you've thought about that as you've built your career. Where does driving diversity and inclusion at all levels, but particularly when we think about boards, fall into your overall kind of work day?
Oh, it's central. I think that, we have to, in my experience, right? If like you talked about Gandhi, right? Like, I mean, from MLK's word, like if not us, then who, right? If not now, then when? So we really have to be action oriented, and those of us who are privileged enough to be leading a company where we can literally build, as you said, our dream team, right? Like to answer your question, like what is my dream team? Who I have at my board, literally right now. Like you can go on my website and you'll see my advisory board has every face. They look like the world. And, they include white allies, because we need to have those white allies who can march with us literally, as they did in the 60s, as they did in the hardest times. And we are living in those times right now. And we need allies like Jason and Leigh and these type of people, right, to keep asking the question. But to your point, we also need to be aware that we are in a position of power, and we need to harness that power. And we need to be able to say, we will create those boards that are more representative. As you said, we will train the people and upskill and scaffold folks into things. So I think for me is really central, and I understand exactly what you're saying. We are tired, right? Sick and tired. And we, especially you, I mean, with the anti-Blackness movements that are happening, right? And I'm sure that it's exhausting, sometimes to have to be the one who's educating, who's explaining and everything. And actually, I'm going to give a shout out to my Growth Lab people, because and by the way, anybody here who has not even, who does not know about Growth Lab, definitely check it out, because StartOut Growth Lab is amazing. And the mentors and the people that you get are super diverse. And we had a conversation about this specifically. And one thing that white folks in the room called out was how much they really can do to help with this issue. And I think that it's time for us to sort of let them kind of also take action and really feel like they can help in this regard, because we've done the work of bringing up the problem. Right now it's like, how can we all work together? So I think that, to your point about how can we help each other, since we're all busy and we're all tired, but it's going to benefit us, like in my case, if I build a board that's representative, right, of all of us on this virtual call and those in the audience, right, that's going to attract a certain talent pool to my company. It's also differentiate the money that is coming to my company, which means that I'll be able to sort of make allegiance or build alliances with different types of people. Now I'm even, by the way, and I encourage those of us who have maybe diasporic identities, get an investor or an advisor from that country. Like I got a Mexican investor, and I can tell you it's changed my entire structure, right? Like, because it's a different culture. Like they've up-leveled, in fact, some of the American boards. Like the first month that I got that check, they wanted to have a check-in call, and they do check-in calls all the time. The American board members don't do that. They're busy. They don't have time. So, but there's just a different culture. They are more hands-on, etc. So that sort of mix, it started sort of creating a little bit of tension in a good way between my board members, where some of the other ones wanted to step up, and they were like, wow, like this one just came on and they already know more about the business than I do, and I was a lead investor. Let me step up and have a monthly check-in with you and stuff. So I'm telling you, like, lead with who you are, because we cannot change who we are. We are who we are. But I think us as LGBT people, we've learned to navigate unsafe spaces. We've learned to navigate spaces in which we're not welcome, in which we have to maybe compensate for people's perception of our inferiority or our lack of ability or capacity, etc. Right? I think we've had to be uncomfortable or not say the thing we want to say. So that's pretty much a board meeting. You know what I mean? So I think that bringing like to the table our assets, leaning into what we know, who we are, is the best way to lead. So I would say don't see it as like an add-on, something else that you have to do that will add to your already existing workload. But think of like as yourself as an asset, right? You are an asset. All of us here on this call, we're LGBT people. We have a different way of looking at the world, and that is going to be part of the diversity that we should treasure within our boards. And then the fact that we're all these other things as well, I think only adds to the sort of mix. But I would say even within just that LGBT lens, I think all of us have a lot to really contribute from our own experiences. And I think leading with that, leaning into that, at least that identity could really make it easier, or at least feel easier, in my opinion.
I beautifully said. I think not just easier, but I'm hearing really strategic, right? Starting with, I think very often whenever there's anything new, I think very often my first context, which is this classic imposter syndrome, is what does everybody else have that I don't, that I need to kind of up level and compensate on? I appreciate that reminder to kind of look into, but what do I have that everybody else doesn't? And what would it be like to really kind of push in and lean in there? I'm curious as we think about our community and who we are, and specifically, I'm thinking about the LGBTQ plus community. And when I think about strength and how to be successful, one of the things that comes to mind is chosen family. But this idea of needing your people and find strength wherever you get it. And I think probably of all the different communities that I'm a part of, and there are many different intersections, that is a piece that I've really come to love about the LGBT plus community. And this idea that like a group identity that isn't just like a group of people getting there, but like a family that really trusts each other. I'm curious, when I think about some of my best boards I've been on, they have a little bit of that special spice and flavor, right? A little bit of like chosen family, maybe not like level of family, but like we're here because we want to be, and there's the sum is greater than the parts. I'm curious, Jason, with your experience with a number of boards within the nonprofit and for-profit side, how does a board shift from just being a group of experts working together to being a team?
That's a really good question. I think it's an essential one, actually, in a board role, because being a group of experts is great, but if you can't come together and meld and really build those relationships, you're not really thinking collectively around the organization. I think part of it, stems from being able to leave your at the door and really come at it from the organizational interest. I think is a starting spot. The duty of loyalty to an organization and people leading with that. But I think it really requires an effort on behalf of management to try to find ways to bring the board together and build those common relationships so that they can work together. I think when you do that and you build that connection, that's when I think a board can really thrive, because that's when you're willing to actually ask difficult questions, to have difficult conversations that really challenge things. I think the worst thing you can do is just bring on some folks who don't know each other, who might be experts, but then don't feel comfortable saying, hey, I don't understand why we're doing project X over here. Can someone explain it to me? People don't want to appear weak, especially when they're experts in a field. So you really need to build that sense of relationship, that sense of connection, that sense of a family in a sense, so that folks cannot just be a rubber stamp, that they cannot be just there, to do whatever the management wants, but to really be able to have those difficult conversations sometimes that will really help move the company or the organization forward.
Awesome. And not to put you on the spot, Leigh, but I know that you've thought about this and done some cool, different things with your boards to try and build some of that connection. I'm sorry again for putting you on the spot, but would you mind sharing one or two of those that may have come up when we were talking one-on-one?
Oh gosh, I'm trying to think of the specific example that we talked
Whatever
about.
fine.
I mean, I think so for my board of advisors, we have a call. It's been ideally it'd be monthly. It's been every 2 months, but where we actually go over like interesting challenges that we've had, current product questions, just sort of open forum for discussion. And employees are welcome to attend as well. So there's a really like direct relationship with that board of advisors. I think we have the advantage of being a very like mission driven organization as far as for-profits go, that we can have that very sort of collegial relationship between everyone. Another thing that I've seen work really, really well in past boards is I'm thinking of a nonprofit board. The nonprofit is now defunct. It wound down in organized fashion, but the advisory board email list was very much like a, so-and-so got married, so-and-so had a kid, hey, I'm going to be in Toronto this week, is anyone around? Like, it was a very collegial group of experts who had a shared interest in this like particular diversity and inclusion effort that we were involved with. The other one that has worked really well, just as a super small like tactical thing, at Tall Poppy, we have a research channel where the advisors are sort of single channel guests in our Slack. And I'm constantly just sort of posting about like, hey, I saw this interesting news headline, or this interesting case. We have this, design question in the product, really having that sort of low touch way for advisors to engage. And that's been a really effective part of how we've built that like camaraderie within the board of advisors.
Yeah. Awesome. I love that. I know we're coming on our last minute here. And so I'd love to ask one question to all three of you, our panelists. If there's one piece of advice or wisdom that you're hoping that the audience leaves with, what is it and why? I'll give us a moment to think about it. And then I'll pick on you, AJ, to start.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think I would sort of double down on what I said before. It's just like lean into like who you are, and just be unapologetically you, show up as you every day, and just know that that's going to attract the right people and it's going to repel the wrong people very, very quickly. And I think that will then allow you to focus your energy on those who want to champion you and want to cheer for you and see you, right, and affirm you as the leader of your company and or nonprofit or whatever board you want to be a part of, So I definitely would say just know that you as an LGBT person, as part of this community, have strengths that need to be harnessed and that should be used to lead a board, and that you're actually uniquely qualified to do so. And so, lead with that and be unapologetic about it.
Awesome. Jason.
I just say really briefly, be strong and be confident in yourself in this, especially with some of the political undercurrents that are going on that are talking around why diversity isn't needed and challenging some of these concepts. Stand firm with where you are. You know that bringing diverse and inclusive boards is important. It will actually help grow your business. Don't listen to the naysayers. Don't listen to those who are going to speak ill. Just be bold and confident in yourself and stand firm.
And lastly, Leigh.
Don't be afraid to ask for help, whether it's that you're looking for an advisory position. Put that intention out there. You gotta be public about it. I think particularly if you're not like super, super senior, making those connections, showing up at events like this. And if you're starting an organization or you're running an organization, there's nothing new under the sun when it comes to startups. That's been one of the real lessons for me of participating in StartOut, participating in Y Combinator before StartOut. Like, there are people who exist who have seen the problem that you're dealing with, whether you get them on your board or you just take them out for coffee. Like, asking for help is so essential.
Awesome. I love all of those. I know we're at time. This has been amazing. I want to thank our panelists again. I want to thank the audience. Thank you for the great questions and engaging with us. And I'll just close out with my last piece of something to take away, which is every single person I know who's been on a board and been effective had somebody else was a board and effective already. Reach out and show them the way. Be that for somebody else. There's somebody out there who wants to be exactly where you are, even as you're looking for your next phase. Try and have your eyes open for where you can pay it forward, even as you look ahead. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.